Everything that I say after I am, it's linked to my identity, and the brain will always stay in alignment with the identity that we give ourselves. So if we take a very simple example, somebody who says, I'm a smoker, and somebody who says, I smoke, which one's going to have the hardest time to stop smoking? Is the one that says, I'm a smoker, because that is my identity. So many of the things that we're looking at where we feel that we're stuck is what is the identity that I'm giving myself in that area?
Welcome to The Ownership Game with Gary Montalvo. What would it take to get into the driver's seat of your life and leave your mark? The Ownership Game starts now.
Most of us think we're making decisions based on rational, thought-out logic. But decades of research in neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics show us that the process is actually primarily based on emotions. And mostly what we're first trying to achieve is a feeling of safety. Trying to protect ourselves, trying to protect a version of ourselves that we didn't have a lot to do in creating. To get deeper into this, I invited Sara Gilbert to the show. She's a coach, speaker, and entrepreneur whose work sits at the intersection of strategy, identity, and emotional intelligence. Her work with entrepreneurs doesn't just help them build their business, it also helps them see how this primary focus of safety gets in the way and often sabotages their growth. We also unpack the difference between a belief and a story, why emotional patterns, not strategy, are usually what keep people stuck, and how to shift from fear-based action into leadership-driven alignment. If you've ever found yourself saying, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. Or if you've ever been avoiding action and calling it getting ready. If you want your results to reflect your real life potential and not your fears, then this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hi, Sara. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So I'm excited to have you in the show. It's always fun to have other leadership mindset coaches because we get to talk shop and compare notes and kind of geek out, right? On the things that we love to talk about. And so before we even get there, let's give the people some background. Tell me a little bit about your journey and how did you end up, being a coach?
So my first career plan was to be a kindergarten teacher. My second career plan was to be a psychologist.
Uh-huh.
So now they're just taller. That's what I say, But I've
They
always
just
had the desire to help. Always.
they just throw
Um,
bigger tantrums now.
that's it, that's all. It's just that. But yeah, I've always had this need. It's actually not even a desire, it's a need to help.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I first launched my business, I was really a business consultant. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all about the business strategy, what are we going to do, and all about the doing. Until one day I'm in a meeting with a client and we're talking about their visibility strategy, and they're like super hyped up. It's like, perfect, this is great. I love this. It's exactly what we're going to do. Everything that you want to hear. The thing is, it was the third time that we were having the same meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, there's something I didn't get. So I went back and I did a double certification in neuro-linguistic programming. I'm sorry. When that's where I really went into, like, dug deep down into human behavior, psychology, neuroscience, to really understand the human behind the strategy.
Yeah.
Because our life will only go as far as our mindset goes.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
love
really
this.
what brought me there.
I love this because, we're both in the same field, I think. We're both working with entrepreneurs, helping them grow their business and helping them bring strategy. And a lot of them come and they want to dive into that right away. But it's like the moment you start digging around, what you're seeing is I can teach you all the strategies in the world, but if you're not in the right space, if you're not in the right frame of mind, I can teach you how to sell, but if you don't believe that, you're worthy of it, if you don't believe you can, if you don't believe that, if you believe that money is the root of all evil, if you believe that asking for money is shameful, whatever it is that
Yes,
you're coming
everything
to
that's
the
under.
table with, it's that's we there's nothing to teach you until we deal with that, right? There's nothing to
Exactly.
yeah,
And it's understanding like the framework of be, do, have.
yeah,
It's like we all want to have, but who do I need to become?
yeah.
And that's always the first step. So I always say, like, people enter my world for the strategy, but they stay in my world because of the mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
Because
that
at the
makes
end of the
sense.
day, it's that.
So to illustrate this a little differently for our listeners, so if you think of it as like a pyramid, right? So the foundation
Mhm.
is like your beliefs, your thoughts, your interpretations of life. And that's what gives us access to our actions. Our
Mhm.
actions are only generated by the beliefs, by what we see possible or not possible. And those actions generate our results. But when entrepreneurs try to solve the problems in their businesses, they're only really focusing on the action. They're
Mhm.
focusing on, oh, what's the new strategy? What's the new
Shiny
AI
object,
tool? That's my favorite now. What's the new
yeah,
AI tool that's going to absolutely solve all of my problems in my business? But even before AI, it was like, what's the
somebody
new
else.
marketing tool? What's the new, service that I need to sign up with? What's the new, and there's always ways that they're trying to solve the problem in the domain of changing the actions. But if you do not, but you have to, but what generated those actions to begin with, right? If
Yes, and I'll add on to that because of that pyramid, there's even a foundation of the pyramid. Because as humans, the only thing that we're doing is seeking an emotion. That's
say
all that we're
more.
doing all the time. We're seeking an emotion. So let it be safety, let it be living, let it be freedom, let it be curiosity. We're always seeking an emotion. So what happens with words, and that's really where I dug in and really got fascination, like borderline obsession with linguistics, is that understanding that words crystallize an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
but emotion is in the invisible world. So I'm not doing the strategy because the emotion that I'm seeking is safety. I'm not, I'm doing 17 things because the emotion that I'm seeking is that thrive, that
It's,
adrenaline.
mm-hmm.
So I'm not locking into one strategy. So I'm doing like 17 things, just bits and pieces. And I'm wondering why I'm not getting any results because I'm not actually locked in anything, but that's what I'm seeking.
Yeah,
So those emotions that we're seeking, we make a story about them. And then the more we repeat those stories, they become our beliefs.
yeah,
And from there, we know that our beliefs are guided by our behavior is guided by our beliefs, and our results are the result of our behaviors. So at the root of everything is what's the emotion that's there? And what am I seeking around that? So if I'm trying to do something and I'm not doing it because the emotion that I'm seeking, but I'm unaware of it, is safety. Like a good question is, what's the story of telling myself? Well, I want to try doing YouTube videos, but it's got to be perfect, and I don't know what to say, and da 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 da. So there's an emotion that I'm seeking in there. Is how can I do it with safety?
mm-hmm. How do you, I guess this is kind of a chicken or the egg question. Like,
Hmm.
is it that you're seeking the emotion and then the beliefs get generated around the fulfillment of that motion, or do you believe that the seeking of the emotion comes out of whatever beliefs you're telling yourself? Does that make sense?
Both.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it works just one way. I do believe that it works two ways because if your second grade teacher told you you're not that very smart, then that emotion of being good enough, that emotion to be loved comes from a story. Somebody just told you something and you just continued repeating it to yourself. And that became a story. And that triggered an emotion that now you're seeking of proving yourself to be lovable, and we make up all kinds of stories. But that's what's driving everything
Yeah.
is that emotion that we're seeking. And some of them are actually helping us, but some of them are not helping us. So it's like, how can I take that from the invisible world to the visible world? And when I can name it, then I can do something about it. But it's all hidden so well inside.
Yeah. That's a really, the way that I talk about it is like you need to put handles on it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't grab it until you put handles on it, right? And so this is why the practice of self-awareness and the practice of being curious
Mm-hmm.
about yourself and why you do certain things is so important as an entrepreneur, because the thing about entrepreneurism that I don't believe a lot of people who start a business are prepared for me, starting a business has been the most intense self-development workshop that I have ever done in my life. And I have done a lot. I have spent a lot of money in my life in training and development.
Well, our
but the-
R&D department is pretty
but
filled.
but starting a business is because most people start a business because they have a passion, they have an idea, they
Mhm.
have a talent, right? And so they want to share that. But then you get in the game and you realize that that's like 10% of it. You got to now
Mhm.
learn how to sell that. You got to learn how to talk about yourself. You have to deal with money and whatever limiting beliefs you have around that. You have to learn with organization and you have to learn with tax. So there's all the stuff that you constantly get confronted with as an entrepreneur. And it happens as you grow, because $50,000 problems are different than $100,000 problems, are different than $200,000 problems, are different than $500,000 problems, are different than $1,000,000 problems,
Mhm.
right? Because as the business gets scaled, you're now dealing with team, you're now dealing with culture, you're now dealing with
Mhm.
leadership, you're now dealing with like training other people and holding people accountable, which is a whole other level of the game. So you really have to be prepared for and willing to dive into these types of conversations for yourself in order to succeed, in order to get anywhere. And I
There's a
don't think
framework.
entrepreneurs are always prepared for that. Go
Oh
ahead.
no, and I wasn't prepared for that when I went into business at all. I just thought
Yeah.
I'm gonna help people. Yes, that's the fun part. There's,
Yeah,
like there's
exactly.
95% of like it's an iceberg, like there's a 95% that you don't see. So there's a framework that I work with a lot, and it's, you know, self-awareness, self-honesty, self-leadership. Self-awareness is about understanding who you are, understanding how you're built, how you think, your beliefs, your patterns. Let it be your attachment style, your love language. I take a lot of those modalities and bring them into entrepreneurship because they help understand human behavior.
For sure.
Self honesty is like, am I done playing with this pattern? Or am I still playing in this pattern? Am I ready to move on? Because it's easy to know, but self honesty is like, dang, I caught myself again. Like I sabotage myself because I tend to have the avoidant attachment pattern. So as soon as I get close to my goals, then I just stop and quit, or go on something else because I have that detachment. Self-honesty is being able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, am I done? And from there, I can say self-leadership. What do I want to do now? What do I want to do differently? So knowing is just a portion of the equation. It's the beginning. Then after that is like, what am I going to, like, am I ready to move on? Or am I still holding on to, it's like the devil you know and the devil you don't.
Mm-hmm.
We know our patterns. They don't serve us, but they're familiar. So that's why I don't call it like a comfort zone. I call it a familiarity zone. It's something that we're familiar with because we've had the same pattern for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So it's like, am I ready to let go of the comfort of that pattern? To go and explore something that I don't know?
Yeah.
That's self-honesty.
And I think in order to have this conversation, you also have to be in a space of, it's a space of possibility, but also a space of a curiosity and understanding. I find that people often speak of themselves as if they are a fixed thing. Like I'm shy, or I mean, I've seen you speak about also being an introvert, which I could relate,
Mm-hmm.
but also not being an introvert when it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And people are always shocked because, when I'm on stage, I'm very animated. I'm cracking them up. I am very energized. And and people are always shocked to find out that no, I actually identify as an introvert, right? But the thing is, that doesn't mean that I'm limited by my introversion. What's the right way of saying that?
By this facet
Introvertedness.
of my personality.
Yeah. And people often speak of themselves as, oh, I'm not good at that. Oh, that's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm not, and they speak of themselves as if who they are is a fixed and finite thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that's how it occurs for you, well, yeah, of course you're not gonna get curious. You're not going to ask these questions that you're prompting. You're not going to engage in a conversation or process that actually introduces you to a new version of yourself. And I think that is a huge mistake, because
Well, again,
we
it's a survival mechanism. It's a protection mechanism.
say
And
more.
on a brain perspective, everything that follows I am is a command. Everything that I say after I am, it's linked to my identity, and the brain will always stay in alignment with the identity that we give ourselves. So if we take a very simple example, somebody who says I'm a smoker and somebody who says I smoke, which one's going to have the hardest time stop smoking? Is the one that says I'm a smoker because that is my identity. So many of the things that we're looking at where we feel that we're stuck is what is the identity that I'm giving myself in that relationship, in that area. I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert, and you know what there's a name for that. That's called an ambivert, which is, and I believe that we're all ambivert because we're never just one thing. But to be safe, survival mode on a brain mechanism is that, I have this one identity because that is secure. The brain doesn't like uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
We think we like it, but the brain doesn't like it. So when we lock into this different identities, then the brain's like, okay, well, that's what I know. I'm sticking to that. So What is the story that I'm telling myself regarding different identities? Is it true that I'm an introvert? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Is it true that I'm shy? Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. And if I am and I'm like, I'm done, self-honesty, then I can say, you know what? Version 42 of me was shy. Version 44, no longer shy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how many iPhones versions they've had of the iOS systems. It's like hundreds. And I'm like, if they can update to fix bugs and bring new features, I can do it too.
Yeah.
So what's
So
my upgrade?
you're starting to talk about something that I definitely want to get into. And so what you just modeled was really using language to create a context
Mhm.
for which that context now creates a different way of experiencing life and experiencing, you know, yourself and experiencing and the actions that you take. So
Mhm.
let's dive into language, and the role that it really plays in these conversations that we're talking about, and how people and these identities that get created, right?
For me, language is absolutely everything because, like I was saying before, it crystallizes emotions. It puts a word, a label. It takes something that's in the invisible world and brings it into the visible world. Like you put a name on an emotion, you put a name on a feeling. So the feeling is right, but the story is not. It's like I'm scared. The feeling is right, the feeling is there, but the story that I attach to it, that if I start doing YouTube videos, people are going to judge me. If I'm judged, then I'll be rejected. And there's this, but the story is not. So shedding the light on the stories that we're attaching on different things. I believe that. I think that. So there's a question. It's funny because this morning I was journaling and I'm like, so what's the story that I have around that? And I'm like, I believe that this and I think that this. And I'm like, and you're reading it and you're like, this is ridiculous. But the feeling is weird, is real, but the story is not. So what is the story that I'm telling on something? The other day I'm talking with a client and I'm like, he wants to bring more visibility of his business, but he's like, but I don't know why, how. And I'm like, how is not the problem? Because we have content for our social media on a daily basis, it's all around us. But as long as I stick to that story and I embrace that story and I hold on to that story, I have a reason to not take action.
And these stories don't just give you like a reason, like they really create the filter
Mm-hmm.
for which you look at life, the filter for which you choose to experience life. They create all of it. So it's
Yep.
like, imagine putting, like rose colored glasses, on, and now you're seeing the whole world through these stories. And they really, whether you see a possibility, whether you see something as an opportunity or a problem,
Mm-hmm.
gets created, gets filtered through these stories. Whether you have the courage to introduce yourself to someone who could potentially be a great resource for your business, whether you choose to ask that person on a date, all these things get filtered through these stories. So they're
Yep.
really impactful. Like like they really do curate your life. And what Sarah's pointing to is that these stories are not fixed. They are actually,
Mm.
they're, first of all, they're created by language,
Yep.
right?
Because
It's it's just a bunch of words
yep.
strung together, to create meaning, right? To create a context. So once you really get that, then you have the power of like moving those words around and switching those words up.
Well, you get to. So the way that I break it down is, what's the story I'm telling myself? Do I believe that? Do I want to believe that? What do I want to believe instead?
Yeah.
So my client is like, oh, I want to bring more visibility, but I don't know how. I'm like, that's the story. Do you believe that you don't know how? And he's like, hamster wheel just stopped, right? Just by asking a question. Because when you ask the brain a question, when you ask a question, the brain can do nothing else but to give you an answer to that question. We just ask ourselves really lousy questions. So I don't know how. Is that like, that's the story? Do you believe that? No, because I can post on social media. I could do this. I could do that. No. What do you want to start believing instead? And that's where we deconstruct stories. But first, we need to bring awareness that they're there. Because it's always like, this music that's in an elevator, you don't even hear it. Their stories are always there.
Oh yeah, that's a really
We
good
don't
analogy.
we don't hear them, but they're there. They're there.
the and the other part that, I want to kind of break down the language thing
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more, because another way that I talk about it is your goals. When you create a goal, when you create a vision, it doesn't exist anywhere but in language, right? Um, there are, and then once you create that vision, well, now you start living into it, right? Think of the moment you said, I'm going to start a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm going to do. Well, now that vision starts to create a context, and that context starts to dictate the actions that you take. You
Mm-hmm.
may start to, get your LLC. You may start to open your bank account. You may start to build your website and do these actions.
Yes.
It be due to that context, to that language that got created, right? So that's an example of when the story that you're telling yourself in that moment, which is I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to launch this business, it's obvious. It's in front of you. You're aware of it, and it's something that you see. It's something that you can clearly work with and have handles on. Now, along the way, the other stuff is gonna come out.
Everything's gonna come up.
The stories that are not present and aware to of us. And sometimes you're not. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of how me launching my business started to bring some up for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I had once I got my coaching practice going, and I had hit, the first 5 years were me like struggling and trying to figure it out. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I got this. I hit multiple six figures. I was doing my thing, but then I hit a plateau,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't really growing anymore. And so I was working with my coaches at the time, and we were doing planning for the year, and they asked me the question, well, how much
Mm-hmm.
money do you want to make next year? And I'm like, I don't know. I just, I don't know. I just want to make enough.
Oof.
Like, I just want to make enough. I want to be able to, run my business. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to like pay my bills, and I want to just make enough. And when I said that, I realized, oh, I had already
Made
achieved,
enough.
made enough.
Yeah.
I had already gotten to a place where I had made enough. Like, so, and then when I started digging into it, I'm like, oh, you know, my relationship with money growing up was always very utilitarian.
Enough.
We grew up poor, and Dominican Republic, we were immigrants and coming here to the United States, but money was always like a tool to make sure we were
Mm-hmm.
safe, that we had a roof over our heads. that we had food on the table, that we had clothes on our backs, and that there was a little put
We
away
had
for an
enough.
emergency under the mattress, right? And that was kind of the game around money that I saw growing up. So money wasn't, the conversation wasn't like, oh, what if we can, and so I realized that that was playing a part in how I was growing my business, because I
Hmm.
wasn't really thinking bigger than that,
Yep.
and so I had to start to come up with different games, right? It was like, oh, what would it be like to pay for my parents' retirement home?
We play the what if game.
What would it be like if I could pay for my baby brother went into ministry work, sweetheart, God bless his soul, but he's never going to make any money, right? So what would it be like if I could pay for his student loans, that
Hmm.
he's going to like have forever? What would it be like? Sarah doesn't know anything about that. She's in Canada. But here in the United States, we have to pay for that.
Too, it's just not the same scale at all.
Not the same. So like, what would it be like if I could pay for my brother's school loans? Like, what would it be like if I could, fund a missionary trip and build a school, and things like that. And those things started to create a context for me that allowed me to play a bigger game around the growing of my business and the impact that I could make. And so that's like I think that's a really great example of how these stories in the background are really blind to us
Hmm.
and unaware. And until we go through a process or a conversation, or we have someone, who's trained to ask these questions, they don't even surface. You
They
just
don't.
bang your head on the wall, not knowing
It's the
why.
music in the elevator.
Yeah.
But did you notice that what you did there is you asked yourself different questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when we ask ourselves different questions, we come up with different answers. So, like, when we ask a question, we get an answer. But when we ask an excellent question, we get the truth. So, what if I paid for, my mom's house? What if I paid for my brother's education? What if, what if, what if? The questions that we tend to ask ourselves is like, yeah, but what if it doesn't work?
Hmm.
Yeah, but have this weird relationship with money, which is money is so loaded with emotions, right? There's so many things that are related with money in terms of relationships. And it's like, but what if I start making money and then people start judging me? Those are the default questions we tend to go to, unaware or aware. Sometimes it's there and we're not even aware.
Hmm.
It's just, another song that's in the elevator. So we want to bring those into our awareness to see what's there. And from there, I can pivot into something else. But I need to be aware and I need to decide because it's not comfortable. Growing a business is not comfortable. Being different is not comfortable. It's magical. And am I
Yeah.
ready to deal with uncomfortable?
And something that I think is worth highlighting also in the situation that I modeled, the question, this speaks to your point. The question that I asked myself wasn't, well, why am I not desiring more money? Or why am I not inviting, and why am I, and how come this happened, and what childhood trauma happened, and when, like, I didn't, you know, ask questions that reinforced some belief that something was wrong with me or some
Mhm.
problem that I thought I had to fix. I went straight to a question that would create a new possibility. It doesn't matter the why, it doesn't matter the how, it doesn't matter
Let's
you
go.
know, I don't have to forgive my mother now for having didn't te- not teaching me that, money. I asked a question that skipped me to the future of what was possible. And
So,
and I asked a question that got me excited about what was possible. Go ahead, Sarah.
so why questions open vortex?
Oh my God. It's a rabbit hole. It
Yes.
literally is. And I really need some of you guys to pay attention to this because this is like very common, and some of you are addicted to questions like this, and they serve no purpose. They don't
Well,
help you, and they don't move anything forward.
there in my belief, there is no word that is not to be used. Words are to be used with a greater intentionality. So there's two vortex. There's a downward vortex and there's an upward vortex. Why questions, when they're by default, tend to be in the downward spiral? Why doesn't this work? Why do I want, like, why would I want more money? Why would I want this, that, that, then? And it really doesn't serve us. But when I'm in the upward vortex of saying, what if I paid for this for the student for the education for my younger brother? What if I did? What if I just what? Pay for the education for my brother because he's got a good he has an important message to carry, and that opens that exponential vortex. Why anchors? So it's not to not use it; it's to use it in the right vortex. When I'm selling myself on an idea and I'm moving from a belief to a conviction, then I want to use a why story, a why question, because that's really going to amplify why I want something. And I need to sell myself on why do I want this? Why do I want that? And why do I want that? And why do I want that? And we get to a point where that vortex just soups us off because it's like, it's a conviction. I know, because when people lose their why, they lose their way. It's the right why in
Hmm.
the right vortex to ask it. And
Yeah.
they are the most powerful questions that we ask. We just tend to ask them in the wrong vortex.
Yeah. I like that. I had not heard it framed in that way before. And it goes back to, the reason I call this the show the ownership game
Mm-hmm.
is because I believe that ownership is the distinction that allows you to discern and take the action that you're coaching on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Once you step into ownership, you're able to now take responsibility over language and make sure that you're always in a game of using language to support what you're up to in life, to support you in expanding yourself, to support you in building the business, to support you in building the family. And mostly we use language very irresponsibly. We're very sloppy. We
We think
use
they're just
language.
letters stuck together.
Yeah. And the things that we say to ourselves about ourselves are awful. Like you would never speak to another human being the way that you speak about yourself, right? And but once if you step into ownership, you really do. It doesn't mean it solves everything, right? But ownership is what gives you access to
Mm-hmm.
now taking responsibility for these abilities, right? And you might need to learn some skills, right? You might need to implement practices, you might need to develop the discipline. Those things will come, but it first starts with you being willing to get an ownership over your life and over your language and the things that come out of your mouth. And you know e- e- if you are, I mean, this is true for any human being, but it's especially true
Mm-hmm.
if you're somebody who's up to anything. You
Yeah.
got to be really rigorous with what comes out of your mouth.
And that's it. And then you're thinking and everything, because we all know that mindset is everything. So there's a question that I often ask myself, other than what's the story I told myself, is And now when I've really anchored it is, what do I want to tell myself, to myself on my
Mm-hmm.
deathbed? And by, and for me, it's like, I want to tell myself to myself, I've given everything I've got. There's nothing left, like done. I do not want to tell myself, yay, I answered all my emails within 3 hours. That's not what I'm going to tell myself, you know? But having that anchor, what do I want to tell myself on my deathbed? And every single day, I'm either going in that direction or in the opposite of that direction. So that's what language does. It gives us anchors because we are repeating stories all the time in our head. It's time to decide what's the story that I want to tell myself. Instead of, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good, I'm shy, I'm shy, I'm shy. How about like, freaking awesome?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do this. Like, in terms of ownership, and I love that word, is the real estate that we own that is the most important one is the one that we have here.
Mm.
Let's decide what we're going to put there. And that goes with my second favorite word, which is intentionality. Let's get back in the driver's seat.
Yeah. Let's talk about how, so if you're an entrepreneur, let's talk about how you can develop some awareness around not just identifying the belief and the stories,
Mm-hmm.
but even kind of being aware that there's a story there. You know what I mean? Like just having even the, because I think it's almost like you're in the matrix, so you're not even thinking that you're in the matrix type
Yeah.
of scenario, right? So it's like, I think step one is just developing an awareness that you are in the matrix,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can kind of even talk about what's the programming that's playing in the matrix, right? So what are your thoughts and suggestions for that, for entrepreneurs to really take that work on?
Well, slowing down is not glorified because being busy is glorified, but
Mm-hmm.
we need to start glorifying slowing down. Because when I slow down, revelations can catch up to me. I can reconnect with how I'm feeling, not just how I'm thinking. Like, what am I feeling right now? Oh, I'm angry. Hmm. Am I mad or am I sad? And this can only catch up when I slow down. So I often say, take the time to take the time is not a waste of time. So slowing down so I can actually start asking myself better questions. When I say, oh, I'd like to do something. Well, I'd like to, on a linguistic perspective, it crystallizes self-doubt. When somebody says, I'd like to do something, it's because they're doubting their own capacity. So when I slow down, I can actually catch what just came out of my mouth or that I'm thinking. That changes everything. So
That's good.
slow down, pay attention to how am I feeling, and then learn the art of asking excellent questions.
I love that you started there, because this wasn't something that I always paid attention to. It's really something
Mm,
that I started to pay attention to more specifically in the last 3 years or so, because my upbringing was in leadership as a leadership coach. And so with that came this sort of like very male dominant, do whatever it takes, go for it, push hard, if you believe it, and there was just like almost an aggressive nature to it. Not that I was
Mm,
aggressive with others, but that there was a way that it was always like, push yourself, go, 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 go,
yeah.
like, and about 3 years ago, I started to really expand my thinking and explore and actually getting into spiritual practices
Mhm.
and other modalities and in that discovering the power of pausing. And now, like, literally the first thing I do when when clients hire me is I implement morning practices with them. I implement
Mhm.
mindfulness practices with them because you really need that space to discern, to think, you really need the space. And not only that, something that you guys have to think about is the way that we're living today. That's just not how we were designed. We were not designed to have a screen in front of us for most of the day. We were not
Mm.
designed to be this stimulated, to be this surrounded by light and noise. We were not designed to have notifications and dings at us every
Yeah.
few seconds. So our nervous systems are fried. Like we've never been this stimulated. We have
No.
never had this much information flying at us. So what you're talking about, of really pausing and developing that practice of reflection, I think it's really the most important element right now for anyone looking to grow, I think, because you can't reflect if you're just moving. And think of
No.
entrepreneurs, we're always move with next fire, next
Mhm.
sale, right? Next we got to keep bringing in the money, we got to keep growing, we got to keep solving problems, especially if you're a solopreneur and you don't have a team and you're wearing 17 hats. um it can
It's
feel like you
even
cannot
more
stop.
important.
It's really more important. And if it
Mm.
can feel like you can't stop because it'll fall apart, but it really, you really need to, because all those, that innovation, that problem solving, that growth, is all gonna come from the quiet, you know.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, like that's where when I slow down, this is where we actually speed up because we get the right answers,
Yeah.
not just an answer. So coming back to the feeling of feeling rushed and needing to be busy and da, 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 the feeling is right, but the story isn't. It's like, what if instead of doing 17 things, I actually did two, but two game changers and I went all in?
Right.
So, and that's really where we also even realize our own linguistic, the story that we're telling, the language that we're using. Like we know this. It's just we just want to give it the space to be able to go and tap into it because we know this.
Yeah.
So give ourselves the space. And then whenever things come into my mind or come out of my mouth, pause. What's the story? What's the belief? Do I want to believe that? When somebody talks to me and say, that's a story, that's a belief. Do I want to believe that? Because we're taking what everyone around us is also saying as truth. But the only thing that comes out of our mouths are beliefs. So sometimes I'll have clients tell me something, I'm like, interesting belief, I'll leave it with you. They all laugh because they're like, thanks, Sarah. All right, thanks for putting that in my face. But we need to start doing that. Because what we're doing right now is we're taking on everyone's belief as truth. You got to follow this step. You got to be on YouTube. You got to be on LinkedIn. You got to do stories. You got to do this. You got to. That's your belief. Do I want to take that person's belief? But it's in space that I can have the discernment to stay in alignment with that, with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to add, like, couple things from me to wrap that up. The two things that really help me understand that is I chose a belief for myself that I basically decided that I'm not always right.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to walk around as if like I was right. And there was a moment where I had to go, you know what? I'm not always right. This is just my point of view. And it's just my
Mm-hmm.
point of view right now.
And like that last part is that the game changer.
Yeah. And so the moment that I stepped into that, it created more curiosity and openness in my interactions and in the way that I was looking at the world.
Mm-hmm.
So stepping into that belief and that mindset, I think is a game changer for being able to catch these stories quicker. The other thing that, similar to that, kind of the side of the other coin, I realized I'm judgmental,
We all are.
and we all are, and that's the key, right? But I think it was a word that it's like, I'm not judgmental, and I'm like, no, I'm judgmental. Like, I'm always judging situations. I'm judging myself. I'm judging, what's possible, what's not. Like, and so owning that allowed me to catch it
Mm-hmm.
and catch that judgment is just my point of view in that moment in time. And
So
so,
judging is a natural thing, right? The
sure,
lion in the jungle, the lion in the savannah looks around and judges everything. Like, is there danger there? Is there danger there? That's what we do. The brain
yeah,
works the same way.
yeah.
So I'm observing.
But if you're not aware of that, then you don't hold it as a point of view, and you hold it as in like whatever assessment you made is
Mm-hmm.
actually the truth and not just how you are interpreting the facts in that moment. And when you really get that and own it and let your ego be okay with that, it frees you up to catch these things quicker. Um, and because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to be willing to ask, question whether what you believe is true or not, question
Mm-hmm.
whether how you're seeing it is true or not, question whether what you see is possible, it's true or not. And you can only do that if you're first create a condition that establishes that your point of view is just a point of view. um, a lot of times, people often call me up and they're like, I want your opinion on this, or I want, even clients will do that. And I'm like, well, before I even give you my opinion, like, tell me what you're up to, tell me what you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
solve, tell me
Give me
what
the
you're
context.
thinking about. Because I can just come give you my opinion, but that's not necessarily helpful. But if I know what
Mm-hmm.
you're up to and what you're facing and what you're dealing, well, now my opinion will have context, and I can give you the opinion that's going to work for you, not just
Mm-hmm.
what I like, what I don't like, and what I think, and it's freeing. It's freeing in relationships. It's freeing in life, but it's an essential element of being able to troubleshoot yourself and troubleshoot your beliefs as they come up. You know,
Yeah, we have
so
so many beliefs, so many stories, so many, and when we start being curious about them, that's when everything changes.
yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. This has been a fun conversation.
Thank you.
And I hope that we've inspired some people out there to dig a little deeper and do some work.
Yeah.
Um, how can people get in touch with you?
Everything is on my website. I'm everywhere on social, but saragilbert.coach is where they can find the links of everywhere they can find me.
In all the places, and we'll put your
Yes.
information on the show notes as well. But thank you for being in the show. We really appreciate it and sharing your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Our behavior is shaped not by what we want, but by what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to say that again. Our behavior is shaped not by the things that we want and we desire, but by the things that we're trying to avoid. Trying to avoid discomfort, trying to avoid uncertainty, trying to avoid being seen in a way that doesn't match the version of ourselves that we've been protecting. And the sneaky thing in all of this is that safety can look just like normal behavior. It can look like overthinking. It can look like over-preparing. It can look like perfectionism, working hard. It looks like doing just enough to stay busy, but not enough to really put yourself out there. There's a concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion. It's the idea that people are more motivated by not losing $100 than they are by gaining $100. It means that we'll often choose safety even when it costs us growth. We stick to what's familiar even when it doesn't serve us. But it's not hopeless. You have tools available. It starts with you developing self-awareness. It starts with you paying attention to the language that you're using. This is where working with a coach or a mentor can really be beneficial for you. Because the stories that we tell ourselves become the limits that we live inside. And until we challenge them, we'll keep making decisions that are about familiarity, safety. But ultimately, they keep us stuck. So if something in this conversation has hit a nerve, good, let it. Notice the patterns, name the story, and ask yourself, is this really me? Or is this just a version of me that I've learned to protect? I want to give a special thanks to my guest this week, Sara Gilbert, for bringing so much insight, clarity, and generosity to this conversation. If you've enjoyed this episode, please support the show by sharing it and by clicking follow or subscribe, depending on what platform you're on. As always, keep naming the story, keep rewriting the script, and keep playing the ownership game. I will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Ownership Game with your host, Gary Montalvo. Make sure to like and comment on your favorite podcast platform, as well as subscribe so that you never miss an episode.